Welcome to another episode of the Coaster101 podcast. This week we're moving on from talking about park reopenings like we have the last few episodes to actually just talk about roller coasters. I am Eric Woolley, and this week I am joined by Andrew Stillwell. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Eric. How are you?
And Shane Joseph. How are you doing, Shane?
I'm doing pretty good, thanks.
So first we're actually going to take another entry that we started last week in our Get to Know the Podcast segment. So we got a question from a listener who wanted to know how many coasters we have each ridden. Let's start with you, Andrew. How many coasters you got?
So I'm right at 240 and had, endless plans this year to get ever closer to 300, and those are currently on hold.
Sounds good. 240 is still pretty good. That's a pretty good count.
I'll take it. What about you, Shane?
Well, I wish I had gone first because I have 87 total, but that's okay. Like you, though, I was supposed to get to 100 at Disneyland in March. Didn't happen, but that's okay. So I'm sure it'll be fine, wherever that happens to be. But for now, 87.
And Eric?
You're still young. Yes, so as you guys know, I'm not good at actually tracking my coasters, but the last time I updated my coaster count, I think it was around 225. So somewhere in that range. Give or take.
All right, I'm winning. Cool.
Yes, you are winning, Andrew. I would say we're in a similar boat. So onto that sort of segues onto our actual topic for this week. Among all of those coasters that you have ridden, Andrew, with that much experience, surely there are some coasters that you've ridden that were very hyped up, and others that you had not heard anything about that ended up being really good. So we wanted to get into some of our most overrated and underrated roller coasters, a good controversial topic that some listeners can yell at us about. So maybe, Andrew, among those 240 coasters, which of them have been some most overrated that you've ridden? Things that'll really tick the listeners off.
Oh, I'm going to come out swinging very quickly. I visited Cedar Point for the first time probably 2013, 2014, and I got a ride on Millennium Force, and for years it was the number one steel coaster. Still is, I believe, top 2 or top 3 in the latest golden tickets. I don't get it. I don't get the hype. I mean, it's got a great view up the lift hill. You're pulled over 300 and whatever feet, whatever it is. It's a giga coaster. Cool. I do not get the hype of Millennium Force, and it may just be I'm not the world's biggest Intamin fan. And I can't find the hype for Millennium Force. So I'm watching you guys right now. You're both rolling your eyes at me and shaking your heads.
My curiosity. Well, I guess you said that you wrote it in 2013, which was. I am curious. Is this just because of your partisanship towards Fury 325 that makes you hate Millennium Force?
No, I've got this. I think it's a personal vendetta against a majority of Intamin coasters, and it's not all Intamins because I love Maverick. In the same park at Cedar Point, but Millennium Force not my. I just don't get it. I don't get the hype. I'm sorry. Please send all emails, comments to that to Eric@coaster101.com. Thank you.
Yeah, so it turns out that I actually really like Millennium Force. It's one of my favorite coasters. Although when you say that, it's been a few years since I've ridden it. So now it's trying to think of exactly why, or maybe elaborate on why. I think you did mention, I think the cable lift in the view, certainly the first time I rode it, which was back in 2008 or 2009, was mind-blowing to me as somebody who'd never ridden a coaster that big and never been to Cedar Point before that. I think it's also I really like the big sweeping turns that it has and the scale of it. As you roll your eyes, the exact same stuff that Fury does, but with swoopier and better views. So yeah, I don't know. I think you are completely wrong, but
that's fair. And I can keep going with my list. It's a lot more Intamin hate. I think,
yeah, really.
Yeah, I'm next on my overrated list is Intimidator 305 at King's Dominion outside of Richmond. I think, Intimidator 305, it is loved by a lot of enthusiasts. I know John, who is our site owner, whatever you want to call him, he loves Intimidator 305. Again, it's a big drop, and then it whips you around too much. You gray out. It's just not a comfortable experience. And it's another cable lift hill. So maybe it's the cable lift hill. I don't know.
It's also my current most anticipated roller coaster, so I might have to keep that in mind. I don't know. I can't speak for it. Haven't been on it, but same thing with Millennium Force. Like one of my favorite coasters is Superman at Six Flags New England. Pretty much the same thing, just not 300 feet. I personally love it. I'm a big intimate guy. I love the intensity. I like graying out personally. I think it's fun. It's not for everybody though. So if you can't handle it, that's okay. One more seat for me.
Shane calling you out for being a wimp, Andrew.
I'm just saying. I think it's fun. That's all I'm saying.
I rode I-305 for the first time 2 years ago, and I don't think I grayed out on it at any point. I do it definitely leaves you a little wobbly afterwards, and I can understand I don't know that it would be a coaster that I would want to ride over and over, which I think is actually very different from Millennium Force. Millennium Force I don't feel has that kind of intensity. It feels like a much sort of smoother and swooping experience than I-305. I don't I-305 is not, I think, one of my favorite coasters, so I won't quibble with that, but it was certainly an exciting thing to ride. You'll be lucky if John doesn't kick you off the website after saying that, but he probably doesn't listen to the podcast, so that's probably okay.
That's fair.
Since we haven't had him on yet.
Yeah. I've got one more. Surprise, surprise, it's an Intamin. But it's Top Thrill Dragster, which came in at 21 on the latest Golden Ticket Awards. And for those who are unfamiliar, Top Thrill Dragster is at Cedar Point, it was the world's first strata coaster, which means it goes over 400 feet. But there is another strata coaster, King Dakar, same manufacturer, goes higher, has faster speed, and it's nowhere on this list. So I think Top Thrill Dragster is rated too high for what it is.
So I will say that I think Top Thrill is a better ride than King Dakar. I found that when I've been on King Dakar, it, for whatever reason, is a lot rougher, even though it sort of has a little bit more going on than Top Thrill. I do think that neither of them are my favorite of the Intamin launch coaster, or the hydraulic launch coasters. So I can see that being up. I can understand a point of thinking that's a little too highly rated, but I do love every time I'm on Top Thrill, even for how short it is, it's sort of a wow, that's really fun kind of when I get off. And then I don't know that I would ever want to wait over an hour for it, but.
Well, my apologies to Cedar Point and those who like both Millennium Force and Top Thrill Dragster, as well as Intamin coasters. I'm sorry I've offended you. With that, I'll ask you, Eric, what are some of your more overrated coasters?
Yeah, so I'm happy to keep bagging on Cedar Point. I've got no problem with that. I think that I don't understand why Magnum XL 200 shows up on any list of best coasters. I think it's something stupidly high on the most recent Golden Tickets. It was top 20 or something. No, 18 on the most recent Golden Tickets. And I'm what? I don't understand what it's doing there. I get the historic value of it. It's 1989 or something absurd like that relative to other hyper coasters. But it's rough. It doesn't really do very much. It's not an interesting layout. I don't get why you would ever put that over. So I'm sure I can think of 30 other roller coasters that I think are a better ride. I can think of probably 5 to 10 other roller coasters at Cedar Point that I would ride over.
It's got a tunnel though.
And tunnels are great, but I would ride every Great Coasters International wooden coaster with a tunnel before I want to ride Mexel. Yeah, I don't know.
So just for reference here, I have the Golden Ticket thing in front of me right now. So Magnum XL is at number 18. It is above rides like X2, Top Thrill Dragster, New Texas Giant, and Sky Rush. So that's how the public thinks of it, or the voters, I should say.
Yeah, whoever votes for golden tickets, which I don't really know who it is, but Andrew votes for it. So actually,
I'm on the panel.
You didn't vote hard enough because Millennium Force is still number 2.
We know what number 1 is though, so it's fine.
Yeah. So I-305 is definitely, Magnum XL 200 is I think like that's my go-to answer of most overrated coasters because I don't get it at all. Like it's a coaster that I happily skip if I'm at Cedar Point. A couple others that got talked about and show up on the list: Full Throttle at Six Flags Magic Mountain, which is a park I go to relatively regularly. It shows up at number 45 on the golden ticket list, and it's a coaster that's fine. I think when a year ago or so, John Stevenson and I wrote sort of like ratings for every roller coaster at Six Flags Magic Mountain, and we kind of both said the same thing of it always looks like it should maybe be better than it is, and it always kind of feels like half of a ride to me. Like it's got a couple of neat elements that look good, but it doesn't really do anything. And so I mean it's above other rides at Magic Mountain, even that like it's rated higher on the golden tickets than Tatsu is, and Tatsu I think is the pinnacle of flying coasters, and so I'm sort of like, well, this doesn't really like it's one that I often skip if I'm at Magic Mountain because it usually has a long line, and I'm sort of like, I'll ride Twisted Colossus again. Let's just do that.
For someone who's not been out to the West Coast, that's the one with like it's got the loop and it's got the hill kind of connected to the loop. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the premier launch coaster, the giant, very large loop. I think when it opened, it was maybe the largest vertical loop in the world. Maybe so, still is. And then on the return, it sort of goes back over the outside of the loop over the top, which is a very neat element. Although even that kind of doesn't work because the brakes start at the very bottom of that drop over the loop. So you like go over the loop, start going down, and then like get jerked to a stop as you come back to the station. Those are really the two biggest ones. There's a couple. I think the other thing that I would say, which also a controversial take, I generally find that B&M hypercoasters are overrated. There are, on the golden ticket list, I think there are 5 in the top 15 of all steel coasters, and like they're all good. I don't have a problem with them. Nitro is fun. Apollo's Chariot is good, but like I don't know if there's a single one that I consider the best roller coaster in its park. Like at Six Flags Great Adventure, for example, I would ride El Toro over and over any day before riding. Like I'll ride Nitro once and then El Toro 5 times. At your home park, Andrew, Intimidator, it's good, but like I don't. At Carowinds, I think I would ride Afterburn multiple times before riding Intimidator multiple times. Busch Gardens Williamsburg is another one where like I know Apollo's Chariot, it's a good coaster, it gets lots of love, but it isn't one that I would consider my favorite, like anywhere close to my favorite ride at Busch Gardens. So I know lots of people love them, and they are always very well made rides. Like I don't have a problem with them, but I don't think that they ever rank as my favorite at anything.
How does it feel to be wrong?
Now, Andrew, I am specifically saying the hypercoasters, so don't worry. Your Precious Fury, I still consider very good.
I'm with you there. For me, you can't beat a B&M Hyper or B&M Giga, whatever it is. You just can't beat it. And again, this is personal preference.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's called a Intamin Hyper, I believe, is what would beat it. But that's, that's for a different day.
Anyway, Shane.
Well, actually, this is so. On that, real quickly, Andrew, I am curious what you. So I think of the B&M hypers I've been on, I think my favorite is actually Raging Bull, which Coaster101 did a meetup at Six Flags Great America last year, I think.
Yep.
And I think a lot of us talked about how Raging Bull was sort of a surprise to us, and that it doesn't really get talked about as much. And I think it's somewhere on the golden ticket list, but not nearly as high as like Diamondback or Mako. Do you have? Is there a favorite of yours that like? Is there one of the hypers that is kind of in that top 20 that you consider significantly better than the rest?
I wouldn't say better than the rest. I mean, I think they're all really good. Like if you look at my personal top 10, which you're not actually looking at because podcasts are an audio medium.
And I don't know if you've ever written down your personal top 10. I know,
but it's like 6 of them are B&M hypers. Or B&M, Fury's at the top. but you've got Apollo's Chariot on that list. You've got Nitro. You've got Diamondback. Intimidator is probably sliding in the top 10 there. So, I mean, and Raging Bull is really good. I think it's probably just outside the top 10. But, yeah, I find the smoothness of a B&M Hyper far superior to any ride on an Intamin except for Maverick. So,
I will say that it's interesting on the golden tickets that Mako and Diamondback are on the lower end, and they're below things like Apollo, Chariot, and Nitro. I always have heard, I haven't been on it personally, but I've always heard that Mako and Diamondback also are kind of, towards the top. So I don't know if you guys can weigh in on that part, but.
So I've been on Mako. I really enjoyed it, and I've been on Diamondback. I've really enjoyed that too. I feel like a lot of the B&M Hypers are very similar to me. Obviously, Raging Bull is different, but all the other B&M Hypers, they kind of have that out and back layout, where you hit some sort of bank turn and you hit hills on the way back. And they're all great. I really enjoy the ride experience. I don't know exactly how the voters vote or why they vote the way they do. If I did, there would be rides that were on this list that aren't, and rides that are on this list that shouldn't be on this list. But yeah, I think they're great ride experiences, kind of across the board.
So I think maybe part of my issue with them is that lots of them do feel very samey to me. I do think that probably, in looking at this list, one of the reasons that I would guess Apollo's Chariot and Nitro also are so high compared to something like Diamondback is that Apollo's Chariot, especially the way it uses the terrain around it, I think it's much better. Like that, it crosses over the water and it goes into sort of ravines and it's wooded. And Nitro as well, it's kind of goes out into basically the woods of rural New Jersey, whereas Diamondback is kind of smack dab in the middle of the park. So that would be my guess as to the biggest difference, because I think the ride experience, Andrew, you said too, is very similar between all of them.
Right.
Shane, let's. What about you, Shane? What are some of your? Do you have any takes as controversial as my saying that B&M Hypers are overrated, or Andrew saying Millennium Force sucks?
No, not as controversial. I will say I haven't been to Cedar Point, so I will get back to you after that happens. But for now, I would say my most controversial overrated ride is Kumba at Busch Gardens Tampa. Now, this is kind of a precursor. I was only there for 2 days when I went, so if it was having a bad week or something, maybe I just caught it on some off days. But a lot of people have this fairly high in their list, and even in their top 10, top 5. It was kind of just another B&M sit down to me. I like those rides. I love them. Floorless, I think when we get to underrated, I think Floorless is a pretty underrated model. And this is a sit down, so it's not quite the same. But I like those style of rides. I just didn't see what was so overly special about Kumba. It wasn't, not even my favorite in the park. So I don't know. Have either of you guys been on it?
I have, yeah. And like you said, it's good. I wouldn't say it's great, and it's easily Sheikah's better than it. Cheetah Hunt is better than.
Yes, it is.
So
we'll get to that.
One of Andrew's 2 Intamins that he tolerates. It sounds like.
Yeah, it's fine for what it is, but
So I've been to Busch Gardens Tampa once. It was a long time ago. I think it was in 2007 or 2008. I basically have no memory of Kumba, which I'm sure I wrote it, but I feel like that implies that it was not one of the top 50 roller coasters I've ever ridden. Like compared to Sheikah stands out to me. It was that's what I remember. So it's sort of unique in that I feel like there are not a lot of B&M sit down coasters that are not floorless.
Yeah.
So it's an older-ish model, which maybe is part of it, but Yeah, it certainly never stood out to me. It wouldn't cross my mind if I were making a list of top 50 coasters.
Yeah, so that's just why it was surprising to me, especially because I think Montu, in the same park, also B&M, I think is much, much better, personally, than Kuba. I love, that's my favorite invert, I think, so.
Okay.
Next on my list is Steel Force at Dorney Park, which is a Morgan hyper. I think it's one of the few. I think it's a clone. There's a few others. I think Michigan Adventure, Valley Fair, maybe one other I'm forgetting. But I don't know. This, to me, I mean, it has the stats. It's 200 feet tall. I think it's right around 80, 85 miles an hour, but it just didn't do anything for me. I mean, it was fast, but you don't really feel it because the cars are, big and clunky, like the other Morgan rides. There wasn't really any airtime. I did ride this a few different spots, so I tried a few times towards the front, a few times in the back, and it didn't really change it. So a lot of people love these Morgan coasters. They say they have great airtime, but I just didn't really get that on Steel Force. It's a fun ride for sure, but again, like I prefer the two B&Ms in the park over this one, and it's just kind of a representation of, stats don't always make a good ride. So I was a little bit disappointed with Steel Force.
Eric, when you visited Dorney, did you ride it?
Yep, I rode it a couple times. It's similar. It was, it was fun. It looks pretty. It's nice to take pictures of. I sort of actually think of it as kind of similar in my mind of as Magnum, where it's like it wasn't terrible, but I don't know. I mean, like you said, Shane, it was at Dorney. It wouldn't come close to being my preferred top ride. I haven't been on any of the other Morgan hypers. Andrew, I know you've been to Worlds of Fun, so you've been on Mamba there. Do you know how was that? I mean, does that?
I think it really it's ride dependent and it's seat dependent, because I remember I went to Dorney Park several years ago. I rode in I feel like in the front row or the back row, one of the two. It was extremely memorable, if you can tell. But I remember thinking it had really, really great pops of airtime. And then I rode Mamba at Worlds of Fun last year. I rode in the back, which you would think would be Airtime City, and it was there. It just wasn't as good as I thought it would be. Yeah,
it's one of those things where like you can tell, like, oh, there was supposed to be airtime here, but I just didn't get any.
It's one of those things that I feel like Steel Force felt like a much older roller coaster to me than it actually is. Like it's from late 90s or something.
Yeah, I think so.
And like I would have guessed it was like an early 90s hyper coaster where people didn't really know what they were doing.
Yeah,
kind of thing. So do you any last underrated coasters, Shane?
Overrated? Yeah, I have one.
Sorry,
one more.
Overrated. Yes.
This is kind of a generalization, but just from my experience, I have any Aero aside from X2 and Ninja at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Those are the two Aeros I've been on that I've really enjoyed. And I think I should maybe specify a little bit. I'm talking especially about like the Aero Loopers, the Aero Corkscrew, and Mine Trains too. I just think they're awful. They're uncomfortable. They're janky. It's not even intense. It just hurts.
I'm not sure that anyone highly rates most Aero.
No, I don't think so. But then you would see something. When Vortex got removed, there was pretty much a riot at the front gate. So I mean, I say rip them out. I don't care what goes in their place. I just think the restraints are bad. The layouts are janky. I personally, Viper especially at Six Flags Magic Mountain, I think that's one of the most painful rides I've ever been on. So I would not recommend any Aeros be at the top of anybody's list.
Fair. I agree.
I mean, I think, like, I don't hate Viper, but I think you have to be very seat specific. I think staying in the front helps a lot. I think the only ones that I've been on that I would consider good are Loch Ness Monster and Tennessee Tornado. And I think even then, like, I'm a controversial take that I will add in this is I also don't think Tennessee Tornado is actually that great. I know that John loves it. So now John can kick me off the website too, Andrew. But Loch Ness Monster, I remember being surprised by how good it was.
Congratulations, Shane. You've been promoted.
So maybe we should move on to happier topics. So we have also ran on lots of roller coasters that I'm sure we think are underrated. While this will also generate, I'm sure, some hate mail, we will at least make some people happy by highlighting a coaster that they also really like. Andrew, let's go back to you again. What are some of your most underrated coasters? Things you love that never get talked about?
So, looking at the golden ticket list, I feel like they're one of the biggest mistakes, or not mistakes, but coasters that are left off, is Kentucky Rumbler at Beach Bend, which is, I believe it's in Bowling Green, Kentucky. It is in the literal middle of nowhere. It's like an hour and a half from Nashville. But I visited Beach Bend kind of on a whim, and the park itself feels like a traveling fair or a carnival. But then on one side of the park, they've got this amazing GCI wooden coaster with the twisted drop, and I think it would be a lot more talked about if more people actually went to Beach Bend. And I know, like I said, John and I went to Beach Bend. That was just the complete shock of the trip, was how good Kentucky Rumbler was. But again, small park, literal middle of nowhere, tough to get to. That's probably my most underrated. Some other ones just kind of off the top of my head. Also, some GCI wooden coasters would be Invader at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. If you go into it expecting, an intense wooden roller coaster, it's not that. But for what it is, which is a kind of a tweener coaster between a Super Grover's Boxcar Derby or whatever it's called at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, it's probably, a step up from that, but it's not as intense as, say an Alpengeist or a Griffin. It's probably on that same level as for Bolton at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, their multi-launch coaster. So Invader's really good. I think sitting in the back, coming over that first drop, the amount of airtime you get when you're pulled out of your seat, it's really special. It's a super memorable ride for me. Another GCI coaster, apparently GCI is very underrated despite being one of the best wooden coaster manufacturers out there. Prowler at Worlds of Fun. When I rode it last year, I only got night rides, which I think adds to the mystique of this list. But I was talking to past guest of the podcast, Chris Foshi, and he was telling me that Prowler was Mystic Timbers before Mystic Timbers was Mystic Timbers. That was a really poorly grammatical sentence, but it makes sense, I promise.
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah, I have not.
Although having never ridden Mystic Timbers doesn't really tell me anything.
Yeah, I haven't ridden it either, but it was very, very good. Again, I think Worlds of Fun is a park that's not talked about a lot. So, excuse me. Worlds of Fun is a park that's not talked about a lot, and so it's not as high on people's list. I think it is on the golden tickets, but it could be higher. And then
it's right around 30, I think.
Yeah, the last coaster I want to talk about is one that is not on the golden tickets to my knowledge. It's the only one of its kind, I believe, in the world, is Lightning Run at Kentucky Kingdom. This thing is an airtime machine. It's like you're riding a bucking bronco, basically. I wish there were more of these Chance Hyper GTX. I think that's
I can't believe there isn't. I really can't believe why this type of ride didn't catch on. It's a small footprint, airtime machine. I figured parks would be eating this up.
I agree, and it's I'm glad that the only one is at Kentucky Kingdom because it's a nice, unique thing for them. But at the same time, I really wish there were more of them. So, but yeah, those.
I feel like that's something that anytime any of us goes to Kentucky Kingdom and write something about it, we basically all say that every time.
Which, sidebar, if you go to our Instagram, there's a great photo that John took last weekend of a train on Lightning Run, and somebody was wearing a mask and lost their mask over one of the airtime hills. It is a fantastic photo, and it sums up 2020 in a nutshell very, very succinctly.
I'm willing to bet money that person was improperly wearing their mask. Just gonna throw that out there.
Probably true. Eric, what about you?
Yeah. So, maybe a little bit on that same same page as you. It does feel like, at least on the golden ticket list, GCIs seem to be underrated. Now, the first one I want to mention is actually pretty highly rated on the golden ticket list. But when Coaster101 was doing our best roller coasters of the 2010s last fall, I was the only person who put Gold Striker on the list of best wooden coasters, and I am disgusted by the East Coast bias inherent in Coaster101, because in my mind that's like certainly a top 10 wooden roller coaster and arguably a top 5. I haven't ridden Mystic Timbers, like you've said, or Prowler for that matter, but to me it's the best GCI. It's better than Lightning Racer. It's better than Thunderhead. Like I have no question in my mind that it is one of the best GCIs, even now that it's 7 years old. So that's one that it is number 12 on the golden ticket. So I've got to give the rest of the world credit for rating it correctly, but you guys are all wrong. So at least to be able to make sure to take to task my colleagues, that one. Similarly, I would actually say, so I was very surprised when I went to Knoebels for the first time a couple years ago how good Twister was, because that was Knoebels. Obviously, Phoenix steals the show, and I'd heard about Flying Turns because it's so unique. I didn't know anything about Twister and showed up, and that was one of my favorite wooden roller coasters that I've ever ridden. I think it's not quite as crazy as Phoenix. It doesn't have the, like, oh, you're constantly being thrown out of your seat on the ride. But it was a great roller coaster with a bunch of weird, unique elements. So I think that's one that it's also somewhere on the golden ticket level, but I think it's down in like the 40s. But I would say needs to always, like, it's a ride that would almost as much reason to go to Knoebels, and certainly the combination of that and Phoenix, I think, is reason to go. Another one that stands out to me as underrated sort of goes back to our discussion about Top Thrill Dragster and King Dakar. So I think actually this would maybe go back and forth with Accelerator, but Storm Runner at Hershey Park, in my mind, is a roller coaster that like almost never gets talked about in general. And when talking about Hershey Park, you mention some of their classic coasters or Sky Rush, but Storm Runner is usually ignored. It's not on the golden ticket top 50 steel coasters, and I thought it was great. I think it's has a very good launch and does the most interesting stuff after that of any of the hydraulic launch coasters. So I'm very confused as to why it would not be talked about more or rated higher than it is. Because I generally like the hydraulic launch coasters. I've enjoyed all 4 of them. And so I don't understand why the one that seems like it's the most interesting is not talked about more. Shane, I'm sure you've been on Storm Runner.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. It's my second favorite ride. I have it over Candemonium and Fahrenheit and all this. I think it's fantastic because it has the most interesting layout of any of the accelerators. It has that, the top hat's great, and then the flying snake dive, which is essentially 2.5, 3 inversions, one right after the other, and this bizarre looking like straight angled weird. I mean, look, it's crazy. It's crazy. It has some really unique stuff in there, and that launch, I think, is my favorite launch of any coaster that I've been on. I think it's just fantastic. It's so fast, and then you go. It's one element right after the other. You almost have no time to think before you hit the brake run. So I agree with you. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, and then last thing I would mention, which is I don't know if this is actually that underrated, but it's similar to Andrew. My favorite coaster at Busch Gardens Williamsburg was not a super intense coaster. Verbolten was my favorite coaster at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, and so that's one that I would sort of say, like, I mean, talking about me considering B&M Hypers to be overrated, like, I would ride Verbolten over Apollo's Cherry at any time, acknowledging that Apollo's Cherry is a good ride, but like at least as roller coasters in the United States go, Verbolten, in my mind, does lots more interesting things. It's got unique elements. It is well themed. It uses the terrain well when it comes out. There are things that I would change to make it maybe better, but I think, like with Invader, Andrew, it's one of those things that if you go in acknowledging that this is really a family coaster with some crazy things going on in it, that is like the approach to take is like, oh yeah, it's really fun
right.
as a roller coaster, without necessarily being the most intense or the fastest or anything like that. I think that's one that I would consider a little underrated as coasters at that park go.
Shane, what about you?
So I actually, going off of that, I have a very similar sentiment. I think Cheetah Hunt at Busch Gardens Tampa is fantastic. Maybe not underrated overall as a ride, because I think a lot of people that ride that ride enjoy it. But it was my personal favorite ride at Busch Gardens Tampa. I think it's fantastic. There's 3 absolutely prime launches from Intamin on that ride. Some of the airtime is fantastic. You have a great whippy heartline roll on that. And it's just overall, I think it's just one of the most fun rides I've ever been on. It's just every element, one right after another. It's just so much fun. You'll be laughing and smiling the whole time. It's just, again, more of, not maybe I wouldn't say quite a family coaster, but definitely more so than some of the other rides in that park. So, I think that's, at that park specifically, maybe not talked about as much as the other ones. I think Cobra's Curse also at Busch Gardens Tampa. The theming, I think, is fantastic. It's one of the best themed rides I've been on, especially in terms of the queue and station. During the ride, it's okay, but the queue and station, I think, is fantastic. There's a great storyline behind it, almost like a Universal or Disney type. There's like a pre-show, and there's a bunch of videos and props in the queue. It's a really cool ride. And if you get the right amount of people in that car, you can get it spinning really well. Especially because the ride vehicles are free spinning only in the last half. So the ride vehicles are really interesting. So the first part of it is going forwards, and then the second part is purely going backwards, which is a really cool, kind of unique innovation. I don't think there's any other spinning coaster that does that. I don't know. Have you been on? I know you guys have been to Busch Gardens, but you have any thought about either of those 2 coasters?
I rode Cobra's Curse. It was one time. I was trying to kind of hustle through the park that day. Like you said, it's very beautiful. The queue, the theming, that elevator style lift. It's all really great. I really do like. I echo your sentiments on Cheetah Hunt though, and it's you talk about a pretty coaster. If you're shooting photography,
oh yeah.
Especially up that, I believe they call it Windcatcher Tower, which is after the second launch. You kind of shoot that tower, then you have a drop down below. That is striking to see. It is a fun ride, and it's very fun to look at as well.
Yeah, I love it. So also, we kind of already talked about Hershey Park, but I'm going to throw Fahrenheit and Laugh Track in the mix. Again, just generally regarded as good rides, but maybe could be overlooked because the park has such a good lineup.
Yeah.
Especially Laugh Track. That totally surprised me. Another spinning coaster that is a great theme. It just totally blew me away. It's just, again, just plain fun. And that, I think, I didn't have as good a ride this year as I had on it last year. But last year, that is the most I've ever spun on a roller coaster was Laugh Track, because we had 2 people on one side, so we were totally off balance, and that thing was like, I almost couldn't walk when I got off that. So it's just a generally fun ride.
Nice. I give full credit to on our site. We have a list of tips for Hershey Park from a first timer that John wrote 5 years ago or something. I greatly appreciate, because he was the one who recommended go to Laugh Track first because it gets a very long line, and I think it can be easy to overlook because it can get a very long line. But if you go there first, I think it's a great indoor spinning wild mouse that very disorienting and fun in the way that the Spain wild mouse coasters are.
Mm-hmm. And then I have a few more on here, but just to kind of sum it up, because we've been going rambling quite a while here. I think just in general, two coaster types that I love that are kind of overlooked are dive coasters. I think are fantastic. The drops on the dive coasters are some of the best airtime I've ever gotten. It's just an absolutely awesome sensation hanging over that edge, and then you just have wild airtime as soon as you go off that. And also Intamin Impulses, I think, are a ton of fun. Especially, I've been on a Possessed at Dorney Park, I think, and after that, I was just I love the ride, but I was so bummed I never got to ride Volcano after that, because the launches are fantastic. The ride doesn't do much, but just that type of ride for me I love. And then finally, Goliath at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Eric, I don't know, you go there a lot, so I don't know what your thoughts are about this, but I was actually like, I couldn't believe I grayed out on this ride during one of the helixes. But a lot of people, it's more than underrated, because people actively don't like this ride. They say it's boring. They say it's one of the worst hypers. I could not disagree more. Eric is shaking his head, but
I'm one of those people.
I love it. I mean, it's got the stats. It's 250 feet tall. It's 85 miles an hour. It's got speed. It's got airtime. It's got intense tight turns. I don't know what there is not to love about it. Especially that mid-course brake run, if that doesn't turn on, I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things, like, I ride it almost every time I'm at Magic Mountain, because it usually does not have a long wait, but I generally just find it very dull compared to lots of other hyper coasters. I don't know if it's not forceful. I think the mid-course brake run, it always changes a little bit, but when it's bringing you to a full stop, just feels like I think it's one of those things we sometimes talk about pacing on roller coasters. I think it's one of the things that makes like GCI wooden coasters really good, is that they're well paced all the way through. And Goliath at Magic Mountain to me is usually like the worst example of pacing. It's like, oh, here's a good element, and now here's nothing, and here's a good element, and now here's nothing, and now here's a good element. The helix is good, and the dive through the first tunnel is fun, but I just usually find it like, I think part of it is also that it looks like it should be better to me than it is. It's another one like that where it's like, oh, it's really big, this should be super intense, and it's like, why is it so boring? But it's possible that you were just getting better rides on it. Like, it's definitely one that
be
there's a lot of variation, I think, in how it is each time you ride on it.
And again, I did only ride it one time on one day, so maybe I caught it on the best day it's ever been. I don't know, but I did love it.
Cool. Any other thoughts on any of those, Andrew or Shane?
No, I think yeah. I've ridden Titan at Six Flags Over Texas, which I think is a Giovanola, or however you pronounce that.
Yep, is the other sister. Yeah,
it's the other one. Yeah, the one other one.
The thing I remember about Titan is just that they had this really, really long straightaway. It wasn't like a brake run, but it was like something you don't see on a steel coaster very often. It's just a long straightaway with nothing happening.
What's that? Positive nothing happening, or a negative nothing?
It was a very neutral nothing's happening. I mean, again, you're right next door to New Texas Giant, so you got to do something a little bit better than that.
Cool. Well, I'm sure that people might have lots of feedback about some of those, so you can always find us on all of our social media platforms at Coaster101. Feel free to yell at Andrew about him being wrong about Millennium Force. Feel free to yell at me about being wrong on B&M Hypers. Both can be done directly to at Coaster101. We read them and we'll direct all hate mail to John. If you have specific podcast feedback, you can email podcast at coaster101.com. And especially if you've got any questions for us, because we're trying to do some listener questions at the top of every show. So if you've got anything you want to know about us or about roller coasters or the website or something like that, feel free to send them there. That's podcast at coaster101.com. Make sure you're subscribing to us wherever you listen. If you can leave us a rating and review, that helps us out a lot. A big thank you to JM Music Design for our theme song, and we will be back next week. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Andrew.